So what I wanted to do today was cover off a few things that I'm commonly asked about in one video. Those of you that follow me on LinkedIn will have noticed that the latest release of the Automation Generation, my podcast at Spectrum, was focused on the difference between templated intelligent document processing and non-templated intelligent document processing. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that people still have in their mind is, are these intelligent document processing tools still using kind of zonal OCRing? Am I going to have to set up lots of templates so that I can capture the information that I want to off my documents? And is there any other approaches? Is there a templateless approach, as it were? And that's one thing that I'd like to cover. The other thing that we get asked about a lot is in the templateless approach, one of the things that you can do is, yes, the kind of core product has lots of intelligence built into it to ensure that you don't have to create templates per supplier, but that's not completely infallible. Sometimes the intelligent document processing tool is going to not be able to find a piece of information that it needs to be able to process the document. And so what do we do in that circumstance? And if it is failing to do something, as it will do, because it's not going to be 100% accurate 100% of the time, then how do we get the absolute best out of the system to ensure that as many documents are going through touchless, or at least there's the smallest amount of verification and manual intervention we can possibly get. And then I think the other thing is just some people, or certainly kind of post sale, are asking a lot around how things are matched, how we find things, how we match invoice lines to order lines to receipt lines, and how that process works. And that then helps them to understand how they can get the best out of the system, in terms of kind of setting up their data correctly and making sure that data is managed well, but also in terms of looking at some of the techniques that we're going to talk about today. So training invoices that may be failing, and getting the system to improve its recognition results in that manner. So covering off those three things really, but I'm going to load up my demo system as normal and I'll be back to you in a second. Okay, so on screen here we have our intelligent document processing tool. This is in the kind of the admin tool in the background, so it allows me to kind of import invoices and test them, and kind of show you the results that we're getting. In a live environment, we'd be likely be picking up any document type, whether it's invoices or an order or a statement or a delivery note, whatever it might be, from an email address usually, and kind of processing it in the background. And we'd expect the capture tool, the IDP tool like this, to read the document, understand it, what it's telling us, and then to kind of pass it on to the document repository, into the business automation tool that's going to move it around the process, eventually talking to the purchase ledger, or getting somebody involved with query management or whatever it might be. But we're not going to kind of do end-to-end email through to a repository, through to ERP today. What I want to focus on is some kind of very specific things that we see when we're processing so invoices. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to just create a training batch. So I'm just going to click on here and click new batch. I'm going to say invoices and credit notes. Again, this is not something a user would usually do. And I'm going to load up a sample invoice. So this sample invoice is going to help us kind of demonstrate part of this process in a number of different ways. So as I said in the intro, recently I had a conversation with JV on the Automation Generation podcast around templated and template-less solutions. So when I started working with intelligent document processing kind of 15, even 20 years ago now, most of what we were doing at that time was kind of a fixed document, a structured document, where we knew where the information was going to be that we needed, and we were either looking in a very specific place, so doing something called zonal OCRing to look in an area of the page, or we were creating logic that said, document to document, if you see this label, then look to the right of it and you'll find this piece of information. And that's very much what we'd call a templated approach. And those templated approach worked, well, efficiently back in the day, but there's some obvious drawbacks from that way of working. So one of the big things for me is that at the start of a project, if you've got a templated solution, then and you've got 1,000 suppliers, then you've got 1,000 templates to set up, and that just makes it unfeasible in some respects. Now, when we first started kind of implementing these solutions, it might have been that we would say concentrate on your core suppliers. If you've got 20% of your suppliers that do 80%, sending you 80% of the invoices, those are the ones to create templates for, which kind of works in a way, doesn't it? You can see how you get some benefit from that. But not everybody has a supply chain like that, and also, the tail of invoices still represents a big headache in terms of how you process them, and you still had all that upfront setup costs from creating those templates. Not to mention the maintenance of those templates. What do you do with new suppliers? How do you handle an invoice if the supplier changes their ERP system and it's suddenly laid out differently? Lots of challenges, lots of business problems with implementing those sorts of systems. So nowadays, intelligent document processing tools should be deploying a templateless type approach to capturing information. So what I'm going to do is I've just imported that invoice into this test batch, and that allows me to open it and to see what the system has found from the document. Now, I've purposefully set this invoice up so that it fails in a couple of different ways, so we can kind of see what happens or what we can do to rectify it when it fails. But before we kind of get into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about this templateless type approach. So it works in a couple of different ways. One is that we will endeavour to use whatever information we know up front that we might be looking for. So one of the things is that we're going to have to identify who is sending us this invoice, who the supplier is, and therefore we need to be able to also bring back the supplier account code so that when we're processing this invoice downstream, we've got that information to be able to post it to the right purchase ledger. So in this case, this tool that we have in front of us, we have the ability to look into the purchase ledger and to say, send me a list of all your suppliers, how you've already got them configured in your account system. So send me the names, send me the street level addressing, send me postcodes, send me VAT IDs if you've got them, send me bank account details. And once we've done that and we've synced that information into the tool, which we'll do readily on a daily basis, we'll then use that data to say, if we can find the VAT number, if we can find the street level addressing, if we can find the postcode, we've got a good idea of who the supplier should be and which account to use. Now, obviously, there are some of the ways that you'd set up your account. So if you've got kind of branch structure, VAT IDs might not be the way to go. So there's some complexity around that, but that's in essence how the basics of that supplier matching would work. You can do all sorts of things like check the supplier against the order number and backfill if it's different and those sorts of things to get around branch addresses. If they're in different street addresses, you can kind of favor street address rather than the VAT ID. There's lots of things to do. But that's the first thing, is templateless approach by using data sets that we've pulled from the finance package and we've used to identify a piece of information. In that case, the supplier, further on down here, we've used it to identify the order number. So we've looked into the finance package again, pulled back a list of orders, said, right, we know the supplier is tools to tools. What orders do they have outstanding? And we've looked on the page for that order number. So that's the first things about data sets. And of course, there's order line, receipt line data sets we use as well. But conceptually, data sets is the first thing that we use to make it templateless. The second thing that we use is we use an understanding of structure of documents, how they're laid out, how they're likely to be laid out. So when you look at invoices, for instance, you typically get the same types of information in the top third of the page, in the header, the same types of information in the table of items, and the same types of information down there at the footer as well. So at the header, you're going to have invoice numbers, invoice dates, order numbers, if it's not a consolidated invoice. In the table of items, you're going to have product codes, you're going to have descriptions, you're going to have quantities, you're going to have pricing, you're going to have discounts, you're going to have unit of measure, all sorts of things you can find in a table of items. And then, of course, down at the footer of the document, you're likely to start finding things like the breakdown of the VAT amounts and the gross and the net of the value of the invoice, those sorts of things. And so a templateless solution should bear that in mind, bear the structure of the document that you're working with in mind. The other thing it does, and I'm kind of simplifying this as best I can, but it uses an idea of labeling. So if you look for invoice number, for instance, on an invoice, you typically will find it labeled INVNO, document reference number, invoice number, credit note reference, lots of different ways of labeling that piece of information. But there are only a certain amount of ways of doing that. And so taking that structure into account, taking that labeling into account, taking into account lots of machine learning over time, and increasingly AI, of course, we're able to look onto the document and say, what is the document telling us? What is the invoice number? What is the invoice date? Etc. So those are some of the other approaches to finding the information off the page on templateless solutions. And then finally, what do we do when things go wrong? How do we improve that templateless environment? We don't want to go back and create templates per supplier, but we do want to get the best from the solution, and we do want to improve results as we go along. And that's certainly what we're going to have a look at now. So yeah, so those are a few of the basic things between a templated and a templateless solution. The next thing that I want to cover off then is coming back to this idea of improvement. And it's the next kind of biggest thing that I get asked about, certainly kind of post-sales and when we're doing training sessions and those sorts of things. So you've got this template solution, a templateless solution. It's getting you a high level of recognition out of the box, but every once in a while we have an invoice that comes through, pops up in the verification system, and it needs an operator or a user to correct a piece of information or identify the correct piece of information. How do we go about doing that, and what happens when it next sees that invoice from the next invoice from that supplier, as it were? So that is handled within this tool using something called operator-based training. So in this instance, you can see the invoice on the right-hand side, the fields on the left-hand side. Down here, you can see some red flags, some errors. The first red flag here says invoice number, please specify a value. That's telling me that the solution's not been able to find the invoice number off this invoice. As an operator, I can do some very simple things to correct that. So the first thing that I would do is I'd click into that invoice number field. So I'm now telling the system that I'm working on that field. The second thing that I'd do is I'd just move my cursor over the piece of text on the document that represents that purchase invoice number. So this is a scenario that I see every once in a while. The supplier will put the purchase invoice number in some white space. They won't even label it. Now, as a human, we can kind of look through at the document and say, I've got all the other pieces of information sorted. I know what the date is. I know what the order is, etc., etc. Therefore, this number must be the invoice number. Not so easy for a computer, and even very intelligent AI-driven and everything else, computers to be able to find that information. So in this case, we've got an exception, invoice number not found. I know where it is. I'm cursoring over it. I'm clicking on it. Yes, it's filling that invoice number in for me, so I don't have to type it, but it's also then going to apply that as training against this supplier. So as soon as I export this document, as soon as it's out of the verification station, one of the workflow steps in the background is saying, the intelligent document processing tool is saying, right, I couldn't find the invoice number. The user told me where it is. I now know where to look on the page for that invoice number. It's actually, looking for that invoice number in reference to all sorts of static text and graphics and everything else that it sees on the page, but in essence, you're telling it where it is and how to find it in the future. So then the system learns and it gets stronger as it moves along. So you've noticed then that invoice number error has now gone. So we've sorted that problem. But we've got a whole list of other problems down here. We can click on one of these errors and it'll take us straight to where on the document that particular problem is. And these problems are all to do with line items. And this is, again, part of this whole idea of operator-based training. How do we get the best from the solution? But it also helps for us to start thinking about how we're actually matching items from the invoice to the order and to the receipt. So this is the third thing on our list to think about. We had templateless versus templated solutions. We had operator-based training. How do we make things better? And now we've got what's the process for matching line items and how do I make that better as well. So in this table of items, I can see instantly that this item here, this in position 80, has got an order item ID, or we'd reference it as an order item ID. And that's telling me that the invoice has been matched back to an order line and or a receipt line. So we've looked on the invoice, we've been able to tell, what the order was and potentially what the receipt was as well. And it's done that, and you can see, based on a number of different ways that it works. So this is quite a straightforward line, hence the reason why it's picked it up straight away. This line is for some washers, so we can see the description of the line. We can see the product code. I've got product code matching turned off for this demonstration, so we're not using any product codes to do any matching. We've got the quantity and the unit price and the total price. So what our system does, or what this intelligent document processing tool does, and our customizations, because actually this doesn't happen out of the box. This is to do with the way that our PST teams have created additional matching logic as a customization in this particular tool. What it does is it works on a number of different bases. So the first thing it can do is it can look on the line and say, can I match the product code? And can I match the product code to a total line value on the receipt or on the order? So that combination of product code and total value. And can I do that within some level of tolerance as well? So if the total's out slightly because of rounding or whatever else, we're happy with that. So that's the most basic match, product code and total. And when I say total, that total could be from the initial order, or it could be from a receipted item as well. So, if you've got items that are on back order and you've got some items that have been delivered, then the total value of that receipt line is going to be different to the total value of that order line. And so on the page, we're going to use both approaches, order value, receipt line value. And we've got the ability to keep coming back and checking this as well. So, if over time, items haven't been matched and maybe haven't been receipted yet, we can still come back in and, apply this logic again and check and see whether there's a match. So that's the first thing. The second thing it starts to do is to deploy checking or matching on quantities and unit prices. So after we've discounted the fact of matching on product code and total, what makes this invoice line unique versus other lines, or can make it unique, I should say, is the quantity of items we're being invoiced for and the price we're being asked to pay. And so again, we can use those two things and we can look into the order and look into the receipts and say, well, if I have got one item on my order that I have ordered and its price is £5.99, and I've got no other items on the order that have been ordered in the quantity of one at £5.99, I've got a good bet that I can match, the line that I've got highlighted there, which is the invoice line that's saying that they're charging me a quantity of one and a price of £5.99. Now, the big question that comes next usually from people is, well, that's great, but our price book isn't always up to date. We don't always get quotes for the items that we're going to buy, so the pricing's not always accurate from invoice to order, naturally. So again, our customizations allow us to do that within a tolerance. So what's unique on the line with quantities and pricing, even tolerances on quantities as well, for where you've got that whole idea of maybe you're receiving deliveries of oil or fluids and it's not always going to be the exact same amount that you've ordered. So, if you get a tanker and you order 1,000 litres, you might get delivered 1,003 litres and get invoiced for it. So yeah, that matching works on tolerances on quantity and unit price. But what it'll do is be absolutely certain, if it's got two lines that within the tolerances are matching the same, it's not going to guess. It's going to present that to the user to be able to go off and make a decision. And then the third way is using quantities and unit price, but also putting unit of measures into the mix. So, and this starts to get really, really clever. Often tools can't do this level of matching. So by unit of measure, if you think about how, for instance, you might buy screws in a box, and that box might have 100 screws in it. Sometimes you'll put an order on for 100 screws, but the invoice will come in at one box, and therefore the 100 screws unit price will be different because it'd be a box divided by 100, and also the quantity would be different. You'd have 100 on your order, you'd have one on your invoice. So being able to use unit of measure to be able to make some consideration about what we're ordering in versus what we're being invoiced in terms of pack sizes and quantities is also a level of matching we can do. So in a second, what you'll see is you'll see lots of that logic applied to this particular invoice. And that's the way that I've set this invoice up. I've set it up so we can see some unit of measure matching. I've set it up so we can see some basic quantity and value matching. I've set it up so that we can see some discount level matching as well. And I've also forced the invoice to not find that invoice number that we saw a minute ago, but also not find the discount column so that I have to manually tell it that column. Again, coming back to that element of training. So that's what we're going to look at. I know there's a lot to take in, but hopefully you're following me. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what order and receipt information we've got for this invoice, just so that we can look and see how this M8 flat washers was matched. So if I untick this box here, which will show me everything that was on the order, even matched items, you'll see very obviously why this has been a match. So we've got a line that's on the order, and in this case is receipted for a quantity of 3, a unit price of 17.03. Matches completely unique on this order and receipt information. So what we do is we combine order lines and receipt lines to say, what have we got on order, what have we had receipted, and can we match either the order line or the order line information with the receipt line information? So the quantities from the receipt, the pricing from the order, or if you put your pricing on the receipt, the pricing from the receipt. So we basically create as many lines as we possibly can to try and make this match as easy as possible. This one, you'll see from the document, there was no discount applied, so it's a straight match. So it's found the order item ID and it's done that match and it's happy. Now, the reason the rest of these items aren't being matched is because this discount column is not being taken into account. So again, thinking about the way that we go about improving records, if we tell the solution to look into that discount column, it's then going to make the calculations that we need, everything that's going to match, and it's going to push this document on to the next stage of the process. So I'm going to do this in two different ways. The first way is I'm just going to select the discount column and tell the solution that's what it is. The second way is I'm going to come back to my preferred way of training line items, which is slightly different than just selecting one column. So bear with me. But I want to select one column to show you that once I select this column and tell the solution that is the discount column, it's then going to go through all the logic it needs to recalculate the unit prices, to go off and find the matches against the order and against the receipt and display us here what it's found in terms of those matches. Just take a second or two. There you go. You can start to see that it's starting to fill in the information we need. So just by selecting that discount column, every single item is matched. Every single item is matched, and that's because for two reasons. One is that we obviously on the order here we put in the post discount amount, and then on the invoice, actually, if you look here, the unit price or the list price is quoted, so £14.90 here. But actually, when we look into the order information, the unit price is £11.92, so the after discount value. So that's the one that we needed to match. So as soon as I've given the discount, it's gone off and it's matched that line. Of course, what we're going to look at is how we make sure the system also remembers where that discount column is moving forwards and applies that logic through training. The other thing that it's done is it's cleverly done the unit of measure matching. So on here, you can see the invoice is telling me quantity of 1 screws, discount of 10%, list price £20 and 10 pence. On my order, I had 100, quantity of 100, a unit price of 0.201, and then a totally different total price as well. The solution's been able to say, although I've got a different quantity and I've got a discount and I've got a different unit price, I've still got a match. And I've got that match because I know that I can do some standard unit of measure conversions to have a look and say, well, actually, if this was a box of 100, that would be a match. And so that's what we call blind unit of measure matching. So that's going on in the background, our own IP doing that blind unit of measure conversions. You can also look into the ERP system and say, well, do we know up front that these items are going to be delivered in a different pack size or invoiced in a different pack size? We have got a customer that works in the food industry. They buy potatoes in tons. They get delivered in 25-kilo bags. They know that's going to happen, and against that product in their product catalog in their ERP system, they've got that information. We order in this unit measure, they invoice in that unit of measure. And so we've also got the ability to use what we know. So if we know those conversions, we'll use them. If we don't know them, we'll still apply a whole list of unit of measure conversions that we know over time that we've built up that we're going to apply automatically blindly in the background. So that is how we've then got rid of all of our warnings, and this invoice would then be able to be processed without any more manual handling. The last thing that I want to talk about is I want to show you my preferred method for training line items. So yes, everything calculated out nicely when I clicked on the discount percentage column there, but my preferred way of training line items is slightly different than just telling it the right columns. This is often the case because you've got multiple columns within the document. You might not want every single column to be found, but you might also have things on different rows and some complexity around the table that means that just clicking on columns isn't the right way to do it. So one of the things with line item training is consistency is great. So you want to do this training. If you train one invoice, you want to train the next invoice the same way. And so what I do is I clear the existing results down entirely by clicking that red cross. I then click just here on the line items in the top left-hand corner, and I drag a rectangle around the first line, roughly around the first line. What this will do is it will set up the first line in the table for me. I will then go about training. I'm going to slightly improve the location of this box actually, so let's make it a little bit better. I'll go about training the system to find specific pieces of information on that line. So I know that the position column is going to be this line number here, so I'm going to click on that. I know the product code or the article number is this, so I'm going to click into article. I'm going to hover over the article. I'm going to click on that. I know that the description obviously is in the description column, so I'm going to drag a box around where the description column should be. The quantity isn't 1, it kind of fills in a default as 1 if it doesn't find any quantity in this case, but I'm going to click on the right quantity, it's there, it's 2. Haven't got any unit of measure column in here, so the invoice isn't telling me what the conversion is. I've got a price, so it is a list price, but I'm going to click into the unit price and I'm going to click on list price. I haven't got a pricing denominator, so unit of measures usually kind of pack each, those sorts of descriptions. Unit price denominator is usually 100, 1000, telling us what quantity they're ordering in. I'm going to also train the total value here, and then finally I'm going to click into the discount value and change the discount value here. It doesn't really matter what order you do it in. So you can now see that we've got that matched line, but clearly the rest of the table is outstanding. So, and this is why I do this way rather than just clicking on columns. I will then select one of the kind of most prominent columns. So in this case, I'm going to select the list price, unit price, and I know that unit price is going to change on every row. So if I tell the system to apply the same logic on every row based on where it finds the unit price, it's going to do a good job of finding every single row correctly moving forwards. So I'm going to right click on unit price. I'm going to say continue line items. And what you'll see in a few seconds is it's going to draw boxes around each of those rows. So I've got all my rows, and then straight away we've got all our matches as well. That for me is the best way of training line items. Drag a box, clear down everything you've done previously, drag a box around that first line, train each of the individual columns into each of the individual fields in the on the left hand side in the line items box, and then do the continue line items option through the right click. That will give me a really good solid training set. And like I say, I tend to say, if it's on the document and you've got an area in the line items on the left hand side for it, train it. Even if you don't necessarily have a problem with discounts or whatever else, then train it, because that will provide you with some consistency moving forwards. If that's what everyone does, you're always going to get consistent trainings. So let's prove this out a little bit. I've just hit save there on this invoice. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look at my training batches. So this is in the background again, tells me what training's been done in the past. No training's been done in the past. Quickly go back to my test batch, and I'm going to right click on this invoice and I'm going to say train. So you wouldn't have to do that process in the live environment. You point and click, you draw your boxes, you press close, and automatically in the background, invoice would be exported to the repository, training set would be created, and you continue on your way. You wouldn't have to do anything else. Because I'm in the admin tool in the background, I'm doing things a little manually. So I've said to the system, train this document based on what I've told you, and then we'll have a look at that training set, and then we'll pull in another invoice of exactly the same type, and we'll see that it's going to apply that logic moving forward for us. So it's just going through creating the logic for us for this training of this document. So you can see it's setting up different bits of the training aspects, and it's applying that training in that training set that we've got. Now, the other thing to mention here is that at Spectrum, one of the things that we do is that in the first few weeks of a project, we have a tool, if our customers allow us to access this data, that can give us insights into how many documents are going through the system zero touch, which ones need verification, which rules were breached, and so that we can see the effectiveness of the solution and what's going on. And we're very carefully monitoring that in those first few weeks. We provide a level of care called hypercare in those first few weeks, and this is one aspect of that. And we proactively then go into these training batches in the background, and if we see, through the stats, there's one particular supplier that's having a problem, we'll go in and we'll check the training and we'll help, and we'll make sure that the system's performing in the best possible way it can do. And that approach has been great recently. Brilliant feedback from clients. We've seen some really big spikes in the number of invoices and the number of orders and the number of statements that are going through zero touch by using that approach. There are so many aspects that can affect the level of accuracy you get from finding information, matching information, and everything else, that it's hard to say, what should you be aiming for. And it's one of the questions that we ask at the beginning of the project. What does success look like for you? What is that percentage that you're aiming for? And we'll obviously help you work towards that. It's never going to be 100%. There's always going to be a bit of training like we've seen here today, and there's always the possibility that the data isn't good enough to have a match or whatever it might be, but we're going to help you in every possible way to get the best possible results that you can. Okay, that training has finished. So if we look now, you can see we've got a training batch. It was blank before. And now I'm going to just go in, create a new test batch, and load an invoice up again. And what I'm hoping to see is that this time, because we've done that point and click training on the invoice number, and because we did that careful training of the line items, it will now find all the information correctly on the page, and it'll be a match. And so in the future, the user wouldn't need to verify this invoice. It would go straight through touchless. Again, whilst we're kind of waiting for this this document to recognize, you've got to remember that I have kind of forced this document to show us some of these training requirements. So putting that invoice number in the blank space helps, and messing with the with how the discount and everything else is applied on the page helps as well. So yeah, second time round, invoice has gone into that test batch. You can see just with one training, invoice number was found, line items were found. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that invoice number wouldn't be found or that the line items would need training. It's an example of what you should do in order to be able to train things when things do go wrong. I hope that's been insightful. I hope some people have been able to take some interest away from this to be able to apply maybe to how they're using their own document processing tools. If any of the topics that we've covered today resonate with you, you want any more information, you want to pick my brains about anything, please do reach out. Probably the best way to contact me at the moment is through LinkedIn. I'm posting daily on there. I'm obviously uploading YouTube videos as well, so look out for some more videos. But yeah, I hope that's been of help. Thank you for watching and listening. Yeah, so as I said at the end of the demo there, I hope this has been useful for some people. I think I'll make this available to our existing customers so they can use that if they've got any questions around training or how things get matched. But if you're looking at this and you're thinking about implementing intelligent document processing tools, then please feel free to pick my brains. I'm available on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way to initially contact me. No pressure. Doesn't have to be a sales environment. It can just be advice, as it were. What we do at Spectrum for our kind of prospective clients is we provide these sorts of demonstrations, but we'd first do a discovery session to understand a little bit more about your existing processes, how you're doing things now, a little bit more maybe about the things that you're struggling with, so that we can kind of tailor the demo to you. We'd also use your own documents and data. So you'd see your own invoices going through that match scenario. It's all very good seeing them kind of match in a generic environment, but you want to see it with your own invoices and your own data. So that tends to be how I do things when I'm kind of working with a client in the early stages. But as I say, no pressure, no sales pressure. Reach out. We can have a chat. I'm happy to hear from other process automation professionals as well. So let's start talking. Many thanks. Cheers.